I don't really have much to say about the story in the gospel today about the feeding of the 5,000. Well, more than 5,000. It says there were women and children there too, so maybe 10,000, 15,000. Except that I did wonder when I read that over this week what it would actually look like if they all had to stay 6 feet apart that day. But we continue today with the story of Jacob, and that's what I want to talk about. 2 weeks ago, we read about Jacob's night vision at Bethel, sensing that he was in the house of God, that he had found the gateway to heaven, seeing the ladder from heaven and angels ascending and descending. And then last week, we heard about Jacob's stay with his uncle Laban, the brother of his mother, and how Laban tricked him into marrying Laban's eldest daughter, Leah, when Jacob thought he was really marrying the youngest daughter, Rachel. That's a good story. You should read it over. I love the sense of Jacob's surprise where it says, when morning came, it was Leah. The tent must have been pretty dark. And apparently, through his marriage to Leah, Jacob gained marital access, equivalent marital access to Leah's maid Zilpah. And then finally he gets to marry Rachel, who also has a maid, after he works for 7 more years under Laban. Now, in the end, though, it seems that Jacob always gets what he wants. The birthright from his father Isaac, the patriarchal blessing from God at Bethel, 2 wives, 2 maids, children from all of them. He also ends up besting Laban in the sheep business. Jacob's really quite a guy. Still, we learn today that cunning and charm, strategic retreat, even a talent for sheep breeding, can only take you so far. Sooner or later, if you're really going to get on living your life, you have to face up to what you've done to get there. You have to face up to who you are. Only the truth, the whole truth, will really set you free. Esau was finally coming, it seemed, for his revenge. And Jacob knew the danger. This was his twin brother. This was the firstborn that Jacob had cheated. He was darker, he was wilder, seeming more dangerous to Jacob. He also symbolizes, I think, Jacob's own dark side, as well as the Edomite neighbors of the Hebrews. We all have a dark side, you know. Carl Jung talks about it as the sum total of the roads not taken, the options that we've rejected in life, the anger maybe that we've suppressed, the appetites that we've sublimated to put their energy elsewhere. So the story of Jacob and Esau is really told on 2 different levels, at least 2 different levels. It's a legend about the ancestors of the tribes involved, and also a story of a division in every human being, a split between our instinctual lives, which are not really immoral, they're just amoral, and the lives that we aspire to in a more developed civilization. Sometimes we repress that dark side. We pretend it's not there. Often we project it onto other people, prejudging them for what is really our own unconscious, unintegrated otherness that's calling out for recognition. That's true on the tribal and national level, and we can look at that in understanding that the Middle East, for example, will never have peace until the deep interrelationship of all the people who are living there is acknowledged and integrated. Hebrews and Edomites, Israelis and Palestinians. And we can't live a whole life, an honest life, without embracing the complex nature of our human beings, light and dark, good and bad, wild and reserved. So Jacob moves his flocks and his family to safety on the other side of the river. The symbols, the fruits of his successful life need protection. But the fact is, they also weren't going to be of much help. This was going to be a very personal confrontation. Spiritual growth and psychological integration usually don't happen in the first part of life. We go to school, we start careers, we may find love and raise a family, and for many people that seems to be enough. As I said last week, the needs for safety and security, relationship and accomplishment can really be taken care of without a lot of spiritual practice or any psychological crisis. But Jacob couldn't let it go, or maybe it wouldn't let him go. Many people just can't let it go. They need to go further. They know that there's more. They know that they're more. They know that the way out of whatever trouble they may be in requires going further. Without confronting darkness and moral ambiguity, without coming to terms with his twin brother, Jacob would have pretty much remained an older version of what he already was, a cocky, self-satisfied adolescent. Successful, but not very deep. His world would remain spiritually shallow, his wealth just a cover for the underlying guilt and fear. So he turns and waits. He finds the courage, he faces the struggle. And it says that while he's waiting there, he wrestles with a man. But then it says he wrestles with God. Maybe he's wrestling with himself, maybe all three. And he won't let go until he obtains a blessing, until he obtains a way to connect with and integrate that rejected part of himself, that rejected brother, to be a whole person. And in that struggle to be a whole person, Jacob is wounded, it says. In any spiritual work, any deep and honest psychological work, we become very vulnerable. And chances are, in some way, we will be wounded in our egos, which is probably pretty healthy, and wounded in our souls, which is something we can't help. We need to do that. We need to acknowledge our own deep fallibility. the impulses we've given into, the cruel words we've spoken without thought. That's a part of who we are too. Ever since Eden, we've been ashamed to be naked, ashamed to be seen for who we really are, at least fully who we really are. And since God sees us as we fully really are, we struggle with God. Jacob's new name, Israel, means the one who struggles with God, the one who wrestles with God. The religious tradition that we have inherited is a continuing human struggle with ultimate reality, with God, with life, a struggle for blessing, a struggle for soul, a struggle for truth and love of it all. It's only through the wounding, though, that Jacob receives the blessing. It's only by facing the darkness within us that we can find the wholeness that we are. That's the message of the cross as well, by the way. It's not all about just loaves and fishes. The thing is, though, the wonderful anticlimactic thing is that Esau turns out not to be much of a problem at all. When they meet, Esau embraces Jacob. They kiss, they weep. The problem really hadn't been Esau. It was Jacob in his own divided self. And once the darkness comes to light, the darkness isn't nearly as threatening. We can see, I think, an example of how this works on a social and cultural level in our nation's struggle to deal with systemic racism. We cheated and stole from our darker twin brother, stole his very freedom. And we prospered in part as a result of that sin. And because of the shame of facing up to that evil at our own origins, we've repressed it, we've denied it. We've been blaming bad apples since the Garden of Eden. And we projected then all that negativity out of ourselves and onto the very victims of our crime. And it's because of that alienation from those who have been an integral part of our nation for 401 years that whatever prosperity we've gained remained on the surface only. We were cocky adolescents with very dangerous toys. And now we're in a struggle as a nation with ourselves. The wrestling's begun. And the question is, will we let ourselves be wounded and through that wound be blessed? Will we accept our fallibility and try to make amends? Will we find through this struggle a truth and reconciliation, a way to become the light to the nations that we were formed to be? And paradoxically, we can only become that light if we accept our darkness. So national or personal, we wrestle with ourselves, we wrestle with God to find a wholeness and a love that Jacob thought and Jesus taught are worth the wounding. So we limp on to whatever God may have in store for us. Thanks be to God.